Chapter 36. Scattering all the different gun parts took several stops. They used everything from trash cans to dumpsters and sewer grates, which made the process faster than originally expected. After that, they headed directly to the airport and checked into their flight. Using their new identities allowed them to get on the plane without an issue. In fact, nothing happened even after they had reached their car. Rip did find a GPS device underneath their car in the airport's garage. That likely meant there were more as well, but he wasn't trained in how to find them, nor did he have the patience. He removed the one he did find, and together they set off for their apartment. Knowing that they would be picked up soon anyway, Ashley pulled out her phone, turned it on, and called her father. Rip tried not to listen to the one-sided conversation as he drove them home. If they had time when they reached the apartment, then they needed to send the information they had gathered to the Weaver. Honestly, it was something they should have done the night before. Sleep had dragged them into its sweet embrace, and they had forgotten. Jet lag was a very real thing, and had hit them hard after they had finished up their other tasks. Unfortunately, knowing what he did about the lettered agencies, there was little doubt in his mind that someone would be waiting for them when they arrived. "How's he doing?" he asked as she hung up the call a few minutes later. "The lawyers have managed to get all charges against him dropped. However, all of his accounts are still frozen. It looks like that is how they are going to stay for a while as well." She bit the inside of her cheek while squeezing her phone tight. "I don't know, it just feels like..." Ashley shrugged. If everything was just going to be resolved this easily, why were we rushing to get back so quickly? That wasn't a question that he had an answer to. I guess we were just panicking. Besides, neither of us knew how quickly he would be able to take care of the charges. The procedure for something like this isn't exactly well known. I imagine it's taken more case by case than anything else. He took hold of her hand and brought it to his lips. "Look on the bright side. At least this way, you can still help your dad with the board meeting and really make sure everything goes well. You won't just be worrying non-stop and winging it in the end." She glared at him. "I know it's a good thing. Trust me, I do. At the same time, it's just one more reminder of how out of our depth we are." She let her head rest against the window as she watched cars go by. Real life is nothing like the books, you know? Where you can always count on things happening at a certain time, even if there is no real reason for them to. When Dad was taken away, I was certain that he was going to be held for questioning until the board meeting. Looking back now, I guess there was no real reason for them to hold him that long. He had a reason for what he did, and they would have easily been able to verify it. Especially considering how many people have tried reaching out to you. He nodded along, following her thought process. To be fair, we were originally coming back here to provide support for him during the board meeting anyway. With all the charges dropped, you can still do that. It'll just hopefully be easier to convince everyone it was all a giant misunderstanding. Yeah, maybe. She eventually glanced over to him, her eyes having been stuck on the rearview mirror for the last couple of minutes. "You know someone is following us, right?" "Yup, they weren't even trying to hide the fact that they have been tailing us," he replied, his eyes flicking to the mirror for a split second. The car in question was a nondescript dark blue Ford sedan. It had been following them since they left the highway after leaving the airport. Several cars were waiting for them when they pulled into the parking area of their apartment complex. All of the predictably dressed G-men were wearing the same sort of suit, though a few were of markedly higher quality than the others. Ignoring them for the moment, Rip and Ashley unloaded their suitcases and headed for the elevator. There was a mad scramble, as they all tried to cram into the small space with them at the same time. All but the two agents who had been following them in the Ford sedan managed to make it inside. It was more than a little crowded, but at least everyone knew what a shower and deodorant were. Exiting the elevator, they found 4 more agents leaning against the wall next to the door of their apartment. Rip took a moment to rub his closed eyes and crack his neck. "Come on guys, really? Was all of this necessary? We know you have already been inside our apartment. Why all the pageantry? Just stay inside and wait for us like normal, annoying kidnappers. There is no reason to wait in the garage and outside our door. You are going to scare our neighbors and get us kicked out." As if to prove his words correct, the door of their apartment opened, and a stern-looking man, accompanied by a severe-looking woman, stepped outside. "It's good to see you again, Rip. According to the report we've been given of your exploits overseas, you haven't changed much since the last time we met," the woman said with a small nod. "Meredith," Rip spat out as though the name itself was a vile curse. "What are you doing here? We had an agreement. One that you have broken." He shook his head. No, I haven't, and you know it. Now, why are you here? Nathan is going to have your head when he finds out, and that's only assuming I haven't already taken it myself first. He snarled at her. You haven't forgotten the last words I said to you back then, have you? She shook her head, the motion taking on an abrupt jerking quality as her skin lost some of its color. I haven't. Believe it or not, I have learned a lot since you were rescued years ago. I regret how I handled the situation, but I was ordered to participate in this mission. There was no option for refusal. You should have done so anyway, Rip growled at her, his hands clenched tight. His entire body was vibrating with anger and the barely restrained desire to hurt the woman in front of him. Ashley looked at the woman and then at Rip, her eyes flipping back and forth before widening suddenly in anger. You're the bitch who let him stay in solitary for 3 weeks when he was first brought back to Syria, while they took their time checking his information. Rip nodded once, his jaw clenched and nose flared. She's also the one who forced me to go through an entire year of constant psych evals after they released me to the American embassy, and her superiors eventually forced her to let me out. If it was up to her, I would still be locked up in solitary confinement. He spat the words out, barely finding the strength to restrain himself from going after her. What is wrong with you? Ashley screeched. What kind of monster locks a 13-year-old kid that was just rescued from a life of torture in solitary confinement? As I said, I regret how I handled the situation now. I have learned a lot in the years since then. Meredith ground out, looking away from them, her cheeks flushed in clear shame. Rip ground his teeth together, his knuckles popping as his fists clenched ever tighter. Finally, he breathed out and stomped past the gathered agents to the open door of their apartment. Let us put away our luggage, and then you can ask your questions, he said at last, as he pushed his way past Meredith and her partner. Chapter 37. Rip and Ashley were grilled by the crowd of agents for several hours. They wanted to know everything that had happened, with a complete play-by-play of events. Then they had run through those same events time and again to make sure everything had been covered. They made sure to skip over certain items, but the entire experience was exhausting. Not to mention, going over everything in that much detail was having an interesting effect on Ashley. She had started to disassociate from the event some, and talking about it had brought her back to reality. Halfway through the interview, she had simply started crying and hadn't stopped since. They weren't great heaving sobs, but instead continually leaking tears with the occasional hiccup. Talking about it in this manner was serving to become a clearly therapeutic session for her. She had been through a lot over the last week, and had seen and experienced things that she had never even considered being part of her life before. By the time the interview was nearing its end, Ashley had learned several things about herself. Namely, that she was fine with everything they had done. Those people had all deserved what they had gotten. Moreover, she realized just how much she had enjoyed certain aspects of it all as well. It had been scary, terrifying really, but she had never felt more alive. It was something that required more thought. Finally, the various agents had finished asking all their questions and stood. We may not have started out on the best foot, Rip, Meredith began as she straightened her suit. However, I have been asked to let you know that there is an offer of employment available for a man of your talents with our agency. She barely finished getting the words out before the agents from the other agencies began chiming in as well. What kind of employment? Rip asked as he tentatively took each of their cards. It has been made abundantly clear to me that I am not the sort to be an operative at this point. I don't have the temperament for that sort of work. Well, I can't speak for the others, Meredith began. However, I will say that we would like to employ you for your existing skill set. In other words, as an assassin or WetWork operative, if you prefer that term instead. You would still need to go through training, mainly to understand how we work and our procedures. Think about it, the agencies are always looking for new prospects in this field. For some reason, that did not inspire confidence in Rip. If I wanted to work with any of you, and I'm not saying that, I have decided that is the case by any means. It would need to be as a contractor of some sort. I wouldn't want to be locked into accepting any and all jobs just because someone said so. Besides, as a contractor, that would allow me to work for multiple agencies. They spent a few more minutes discussing the idea before they all left, and the apartment was finally empty, save for him and Ashley. Are you really thinking about taking them up on their offers? She asked, pulling him down onto the couch next to her. He relaxed against her with a sigh, his partially healed ribs twinging softly before settling down. I'm honestly not sure. It would definitely be a step up from the construction work I have been doing, and it is something that I know how to do and am good at, or at least something I used to be good at. However, and this is a big one, we need to discuss it together. Do you think you could live with a man who did that kind of work? Would it come to bother you after a while, or become a wedge in our relationship? Ashley idly ran her fingers through his hair and stared deep into his eyes. You would really turn down their job offer simply because it might mess with our relationship? I walked away from that life once already, he told her with a nod. There are lots of ways to earn money in life. Besides, I happen to have easy access to a certain sugar mama who will one day take over her family's company. Money isn't really an issue. He finished breezily fanning his face. She snorted and poked his nose. Ah, the truth comes out. That's all I am to you, a walking wallet. A gorgeous walking wallet, Rip corrected her with a grin of his own before becoming serious once more. I meant what I said though, Ashley. It might sound exciting, but if you can't live with me doing that sort of work, I will turn it down in a heartbeat. She bit the corner of her lower lip and gently chewed at it while she thought over what he had said. That's a good question, Rip, and not one I have the answer to right now. I've experienced firsthand how good you are. He shook his head. I'm decent, but I'm also really out of practice. My point is, even out of practice, you were able to save me without a problem. You didn't get injured until we went up against those agents, which just means that you would need more training to get back to where you were. She sighed and hung her head, letting it rest against his shoulder. What I'm trying to say is that this is clearly something you would do well at. All I'm worried about is whether or not it would change you, or us for that matter. That's why I wanted to be a contractor, instead of an actual employee. He told her softly. It would allow me, at least in theory, to turn down any jobs that I didn't want to do or didn't agree with. Still, it's government work, which requires an inherent amount of secrecy. Then there is the constant killing. She shook her head and blew out her breath. Actually, never mind on that last one. As strange as it is, as long as you are able to select your own jobs, I think I'm fine with the killing. This entire experience has really opened my eyes to how dangerous the world is. Logically, I always knew that was the case, but it was always a distantly removed thing, something that didn't involve me. It was easy to pretend it didn't actually exist. Rip nodded. He knew many people liked to pretend that the world was a peaceful place, simply because they had never been mugged, had their homes broken into, or terrorized by a corrupt cop. And those were just the local options. The world was a very large place where something dangerous was always going on. I think the thought of secrets between us is the bigger issue, especially after you finally told me about how you were actually raised. I don't want there to be more lies in our relationship. I've seen what those can do to one. No matter how healthy it might be, it never turns out well in the end. They become a festering wound. He winked and raised a finger to his lips. Well, you heard her, guys. If your bosses actually want me to work for you as a contractor, then she needs to receive clearance for me to talk with her about the jobs, if she wants. I don't care if you hire her, or simply get her clearance, but there you go. That's the deal. A second later, his phone became riddled with text messages, letting him know the agents had heard the conversation. In response, he sent off a text of his own to a certain overseas weaver with a request. As soon as the various listening devices were all removed from their apartment, and the locks had been changed, then they could get to work. They walked out of the apartment, and down the hallway to the small lounge nearby, and then out onto the balcony. What was that about? She exploded. Air. Which part? They bugged our apartment. I thought that was obvious. The weaver we met with before is sending a crew over right now to sweep the place and remove everything they might have installed. Ashley's face went red, as her arms went ramrod straight down at her side before slowly relaxing. Fine, you're right. I've seen enough movies that I should have been expecting them to do that. Just like I said in there, no more secrets, okay? I'll try, I really will. But Ashley, you need to understand, talking about a lot of this stuff just isn't my forte. It won't even occur to me that I'm keeping it a secret unless you say something, unless it is something major. I had been wanting to tell you about my life for a long time because I did consider that a lie. I have no idea what other things I might have skipped over though, simply because I don't consider them important, things that you would consider secrets. She sighed and put her arms around him. I guess we'll figure these sorts of things out together, just like always. It's a new facet in our relationship, that is all. Let's get our apartment put back together, and then we can figure out how to help my father. After that, we'll see how everything goes with the different agencies. Chapter 38. Rip and Ashley were busy while they waited for the team to finish going through their apartment. Ashley coordinated with her father and finally got the full picture of what was going on. They agreed to meet for dinner that night, to go over everything in person. Meanwhile, Rip was using his phone as a hotspot and uploading all the information they had gotten to the Weaver. She had already agreed to work with them on the plan, and had promptly started to track down all of Amir's victims. As soon as that was finished, he connected to a VPN service and then began going through the man's bank accounts again. He wanted to make sure all the auto transfers they had set up earlier were working correctly. If they didn't keep siphoning off small amounts of money continuously, the process would never be completed. There were easier ways to go about this, and giving the Weaver access to the accounts was one of them. However, despite all she had done, he couldn't help but want to be the one in control of this aspect. Money did weird things to people, no matter how well they were already being paid, or how much they already had. They had already seen that with the blotter. It was in many ways a cursed item. "Well, looks like we are having dinner with my father tonight," Ashley told him as she hung up and peered over his shoulder. "How is everything looking?" "Good. The Weaver is on board with the plan, and has already started looking for everyone involved. I just went through all the bank accounts as well, and the auto transfers are working just like they're supposed to. No hiccups there either. I'm sure they'll draw some attention at some point, but it hasn't happened yet." The team who was cleaning their apartment of listening devices and changing all the locks was a small 3-person group. Each of them was dressed in overalls that claimed they were a locksmith company. The apartment was a 2-bedroom affair, with the second having been converted into an office that Ashley used for studying. It was somewhat luxurious for where they lived. What took the 3 so long to complete the job was the number of devices they found, and the rather ridiculous places they found them in. They had to replace pieces of drywall, take out light switches, and unscrew light bulbs along with their fixtures. Everything. If there was a place one could be found, they had placed one there, sometimes multiple times. The benefit of having so many agencies interested in you was complete coverage of your apartment in this manner, it seemed. When they finished, they walked out with a Faraday bag absolutely bulging with the tiny devices. "We, took the liberty of upgrading your locks above the original spec you asked for at no additional cost. If you have this much interest in you, then you're going to need the security, and the boss vouched for you. There are a few other upgrades that we recommend getting done. Keep in mind that this is still an apartment. There's only so much that can be done. If you want a place that is actually secure, you will need to get a house or a condo that you own and can properly modify." The 2 nodded at the information and thanked them for everything. Moving hadn't even entered their thoughts until that moment, but it might be something that they needed to consider. If Rip was going to become a contract WetWork operator, then that meant he would probably need to start collecting equipment. There wasn't enough room in their apartment for him to store much of anything. The 2 shared a look as they entered the now once more private apartment. "I hadn't even thought about that aspect of me taking the job until just now," Rip told her, as they began unpacking at last. "I suppose I could simply get a long-term storage unit, or something else where I could store everything. The apartment is close to the university campus. I would rather not buy a house in this area. We would only be living in it for about a year, and then we'd be turning around and selling it when you graduate next year, and we move closer to your dad and the company headquarters. Putting in the work to properly modify a home near here hardly sounds worth it to me for such a short amount of time." Ashley nodded in agreement. "That is a very good point. Let's put a pin on the idea of moving for now then. What were you thinking of using besides a storage unit?" Rip shrugged lightly as he pulled out some fresh clothes along with a towel. "There are a few different options that cross my mind, from buying a small piece of land and putting a shed on it to using an enclosed trailer. I don't like the idea of buying land somewhere and putting a shed on it because it would be almost completely unmonitored most of the time. It would be far too easy for people to stumble across it and break in. The cost of securing it would outweigh whatever benefits the location would bring. The same goes for the trailer idea." Ashley followed him into the bathroom and checked his bandages before he took his shower. After drying himself off, she carefully rewrapped his ribs. They were doing much better, but could still use the extra support. "If you aren't going to use those 2 options or the storage unit, what are you thinking of using?" she wondered, preparing for her own shower. "I'm thinking about renting a workshop nearby and buying an old Airstream travel trailer. If anyone asks, I'm simply using the space to fix it up after work or when I have free time. Which will be true, but part of that will entail me making modifications to it for a lot of discrete hiding places for all of my eventual equipment." She slowly nodded at the idea. "I can see that working. A lot of people already know you work in construction. If you change jobs, it wouldn't be strange that you would want to keep a workshop to store all your existing tools and keep up with some of the skills. I think it'll work. I like it. As soon as she finished with her shower and had changed, they grabbed their bags and used the new locks before leaving the apartment. Thankfully, the team from earlier had also taken all the trackers from their car. The drive to her father's would take a while, and they needed to get a move on it before it got any later. Chapter 39. The dinner at Ashley's dad had gone about as well as could be expected under the circumstances. It had been a strained affair, in other words. Max had welcomed them through the door and immediately apologized to Rip for not trusting him more to rescue Ashley. That had been nice, and honestly, he had appreciated it. The discussion that followed after, however, showed them just how messy things had become for him. It seemed as though he had been keeping certain things about the company from his daughter for a while. There was a group on the company board that had been trying to remove him from his position as head for a while. With this latest problem now coming to light, they had all they needed to call a no-confidence vote against him at the next meeting in a week. The company had been created by their family in the 1960s, and since its inception, a member of their family had always stood at its head. However, over the years since its creation, the number of shares they held had dwindled. They still held 25%, so no matter what, he couldn't be removed from the board entirely. Unfortunately, that number wasn't enough to do much more than that in this instance. The group who wanted his removal also held a large number of shares, and those they didn't own, they had likely bribed. The company wasn't some billion-dollar business. A lot of the research they did was with small teams while they manufactured items locally or at factories in Taiwan and India. That is to say, that most of the other board members didn't know how to properly handle someone with as much influence as the Arabs. Weight was being thrown around behind the scenes, and it was causing confusion with everyone who wasn't used to such dealings. Max was desperately trying to call in favors owed to him and think of other options. Unfortunately, with all his accounts locked at the moment, he couldn't even attempt to buy more shares of his own company. It was a rather distressing position to be in. Thankfully, Ashley was able to calm him down, and together they began to bounce ideas off of one another. Leaving them to do their thing, Rip grabbed his phone and laptop and began working in the dining room. He had yet to receive a new message from Nathan, which, while annoying, was typical. When he was out working, sending any sort of message, even the encrypted ones, could be dangerous. It didn't matter if the position, as was the case this time, was supposed to be completely legal and above board. He was still using an alias, with a legend attached to it. Any contact, however brief, risked compromising him. The Weaver had sent him information about a secure email service earlier that she had wanted him to create an account with. Apparently, the service kept everything encrypted even on their end, which meant you did not want to ever forget your password. The only way to recover your account was with the initial codes given to you when you first created the account. If you lost those as well, then you were truly screwed because there was no other recovery process. Of course, nothing could ever truly be secure, but this was a sight better than the regular email services everyone else used for their day-to-day items. He took a few moments to connect to a VPN, and then went to both of the bank accounts associated with his and Ashley's new identities. The money was coming in without a problem so far from Amir's accounts, and a sizable amount had already been transferred. With the money secured, and the Weaver working to find everyone Amir had wronged, everything was proceeding as they hoped for the moment. Rip pulled up a secure document and typed out everything he could remember about the trip. He tried to leave nothing out, especially when it came to details and the letters they had taken from the two Arab operatives. He hadn't forgotten that they were the original cause behind everything that had happened to Ashley. It might take a while, but at some point, he was going to get his revenge on the true perpetrators. In the meantime, he was going to make sure everything was documented so he wouldn't forget any details. As soon as he was done typing it all out, he put a randomly generated password on the document and put it in the folder with all the rest he had created for the trip. The password itself was stored in a separate secure location, with another 2 passwords preventing access to it. Once all of that was completed, Rip retrieved the various cards the agents had given him and laid them out on the table in front of him. Did he want to call them now, or wait until the next day? Was it better to wait, or get the ball rolling as soon as possible? More importantly, if he called them now, would it interfere with him helping Ashley and Max keep their company out of the hands of the Arabs? The larger question, now that he was taking the time to actually think about it, was something else. Was there anything he could even do for them? He was not a businessman. He had no interest in the field. That wasn't how his mind worked in the slightest. Assuming he did wait around, would he even be useful to them? It was something he needed to discuss with Ashley, he decided. In the meantime, he gathered all the various business cards and opened a series of emails. Each card had a name, an email, and a phone number on it. The email address would be part of a separate unsecured email service that was separate from their actual government email address. In other words, they had given him their public address, something that they didn't particularly mind the public seeing. However, that meant whatever he sent them couldn't contain anything too sensitive in nature. Each email he sent out was more or less a carbon copy draft of the rest. The only differences were the names and agencies he addressed it to. Everything else was the same. He explained to them that he wanted to begin training soon and would begin accepting contract work soon after. That was it. Each was short and to the point. It also helped that he had absolutely no idea how long training would last, or where it would even take place at. His idea of training might be entirely different from theirs for that matter. It could be worse or easier, depending on the sort of program they sent him through. Despite himself, he found a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth as he sent off the last of the emails and shut off his laptop. The thought of becoming a true WetWork operative was more than a little titillating. It held hints of danger, excitement, and intrigue. At least two of which his current life had been lacking, and while he could do without them, this little trip had shown him how much he missed those aspects of his old life. Rejoining Ashley and her father in the other room, he settled down beside her, his mind at peace. Rip listened to them talking and discussing plans late into the night.